iwi. My name's Alice. Welcome to the Chew.
The Chew.
I am not Taika, but this is Corey. And here we are today in the beautiful Arrowtown.
Arrowtown. Thank you, Alice. Yes, as you can see, Alice has joined me as co-interviewer today because Taika had the nerve to go on holiday. Good for some. So, we have a very special guest today. Gemma Cribb is with us today. Kia ora, Gemma.
Kia ora, korua.
So, Gemma.
So a little bit about Gemma. Gemma's Ngāti Manuhiri in the far north. Her job title is Stargazing Guide for Skyline Enterprises here in Queenstown. She grew up in the Wairarapa and is a wife and a mum for 4 beautiful children. Welcome, Gemma. What I will do now is I'll throw over to you, and if you can just tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up and went to school.
Kia ora. Ko Gemma toko ingoa, ko Ngāti Manuhiri toko iwi. I grew up in the Wairarapa in the little town of Masterton. So I spent most of my life there and went to school at St. Patrick's Primary School and Chanel College, which were pretty small little schools and colleges that we went there. And I've got 2 older brothers, and Dad, when we were in Masterton, he worked for the bank, and in those days you used to get sort of moved from place to place, but for most of my time he was at the bank in Masterton, so that was quite handy.
Oh, wow. Where else did he get moved to?
I think he was down before me in Balclutha, and then Hamilton, Hastings, Paraparaumu, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, all over the show.
All over. And so you did all your primary schooling in Masterton?
Yeah, all my schooling was in Masterton.
Including your high school as well?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you... What kind of subjects were you into at school at the time?
Well, at college, I did just like the usual biology, English, statistics, and I did...
I did that. Statistics.
So did I.
Economics and Māori. I did Māori up until 5th form, which would be, what year? 11 maybe these days.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, 11. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really neat. At our college, we just had a new wharanui, so it was kind of brand new when I started there. And I imagine just being a small Catholic school, it was probably a big push to them to actually get it underway and get there. And it was just a really beautiful, sort of safe place to be. And I remember us doing the tukutuku panels for it, and they'll still be there now, which was really neat. Yeah.
You actually weaved them all?
Yeah.
Far out.
Yeah.
That's wicked.
Yeah, just a really neat thing to do. And it's looking back at it, like the tukutuku panels, they are associated with the stars and ranginui, so it was quite a nice little weaving into my current occupation. Yeah.
Did you know that at the time? Were you told the story at the time?
I'm sure we probably were, but I didn't mean anything. It was just a really fun project to do. So yeah.
Fantastic. And right, so here's something that I want to ask you. It's just triggered the fact that you said that I would assume you did the full 3 years of learning Māori at high school?
Yeah.
Third, fourth, fifth form?
Yeah.
How was that for you?
It was really, so we had Mrs. Waru was my Māori teacher, and she was just beautiful. And she wasn't a trained teacher, which was why she could only do up to 3rd and 4th form. And they were just great. We did lots of kapahaka, lots of tikanga, that sort of thing. That's what I really remember about it. And then 5th form, we had to do it by correspondence because the school was small and there wasn't a trained teacher to be able to take us through. And I remember I was fine with the oral because we just did a lot of it in the wharanui. But the written part was just so hard because, I mean, we would do our correspondence in the wharanui, but she would have her own classes to take, so we didn't really have that person there to sit down, and we were really left to our own devices.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was tough. And I remember school certificate, and it was, in those days it was split into two. You'd have to do your oral part, and then you'd have a written part.
Yep.
And the oral part was fine, but the written part was just pretty nuts. And I remember going home to Mum and saying, I don't think I can do this. And so with Mum, growing up, so my Maori side's on my dad's side.
Yep.
But Dad was too whakamā to learn te reo. And so my mum thought it was really important for us children to know about our heritage, and to learn your heritage, you needed to learn your language. And so she started doing night classes when I was probably still in primary school.
Yeah.
But back in those days, there was nothing like planned or set down. So there was just sort of the local guy from the iwi, and he would take the beginners class, and Mum went back kind of with her friend a few years in a row, and then eventually he said, look, I've taught you kind of all you can do to this stage, so you
good on you, Mum. Nice one.
Yeah, so it was really good. So there was lots of kupu at home, which was really nice. And so I remember going home to Mum and saying, I don't know if I can do this, I don't think I'm going to be able to pass school certificate, being really stressed about it. And so what she did is she went away and got all the old exams, all the practice exams, and so we went through them, and we knew there'd be a written question about our pepeha, and then some other ones which are kind of similar. So she just wrote me out probably about 5 essays, and I just learnt them off by heart. And so when
That's
it came to
one way to do
yeah,
it.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, honestly. And so going into the exam, I just had to read the question, because the question was in te reo as well, and just try and mishmash all these papers that I'd kind of learnt and try and come up with something. And I managed to pass it. But I was like, there's no way I can do it in 6th and 7th form.
Yeah,
especially
right.
by correspondence. So that was sort of the end of.
I hope your year 5, your 5th form doesn't get revoked now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know.
I've just learnt
they
it.
find out all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is no one knows our podcast, so you're safe. So was that the main reason why you decided not to go and do it in your 6th and 7th form?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, just hard. Yeah, and I sort of wish now that I did it at university, but the whole thing put me off, thinking that it was just too hard for me to be able to get.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's a very similar story to mine as well. I did get a little disillusioned with how little I learned, I suppose, and how hard it was. But yeah, hard it was, I suppose. And yeah, it sort of put me off my journey for a little bit. But anyway, this is about you. So now another question about what you did when you learned Māori. Did you come out of it having any sort of competency at all to speak?
No, not really. Like around home, like with haere kite, kai and that sort of thing. I mean, that's just basically completely on Mum, because she just used to use it so much. Yeah. But no, I wouldn't feel confident sort of going out and speaking it. But and then saying that, I carried on doing the kapahaka
cool.
through all the way through school, and going in and doing tuku panels.
Nice.
And it was just had that nice sort of safe lunchtime kind of place to hang out, and Mrs. Whare was great. Awesome. Yeah.
And so from a young child, did you always feel like you had a connection to your Māoritanga, or was it something that was sort of like, I'm kind of told I have to do this? How was it for you?
It felt like I had a connection, and I think that's purely based on Mum sort of just reminding us in a subtle way, but just sort of showing us that it was important by her actions with learning it, and talking to whānau up home, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Oh, great job, Mum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
Just thinking how great that is that your mum was thinking, this is not mine, but I need to do this for my babies. That's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And you don't appreciate it at the time. There's not I wouldn't have been like, oh, thanks, Mum. I would have just probably rolled my eyes as my teenage
Of course.
self. But now I'm like, gosh, thank goodness that she did and had that foresight. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so, when you finished high school, did you stay in Masterton?
No, so then I went to Massey University in Palmerston
right.
North, and I studied economics and finance, and got a Bachelor of Business Studies.
Wow.
Yeah, and then headed down to Wellington, where I worked in a call centre for a insurance place.
Yeah.
As you do.
It's a bit random.
Cut your teeth, yeah. And then, well, I was there, I did some postgraduate studies and worked towards a master's in finance, which was quite good because then from there I was able to get a job at the Reserve Bank and work as a foreign exchange dealer.
Wow.
Yeah, which was, just really interesting, kind of a...
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, gosh, you find out all sorts of stuff from
You
from
do.
people, don't you?
Had no idea. I mean, so, full disclosure, whānau, I do know Gemma's husband, and he works in finance in the same place I work. So it's interesting to me that you both have financial backgrounds,
Yeah, quite boring, an economist and an accountant.
So you, at this stage, you're in Wellington.
Yes, yep. And I just met Paddy, my husband, at the Reserve Bank. And then I got a job at New Zealand Oil and Gas as an economic modeller.
Wow,
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, so that was quite neat and such a controversial industry to be in as well.
Absolutely.
So quite good to learn that kind of side of it, and but all absolutely different. Yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about. That's a data modelling.
Yeah,
role,
so
did you
it's
say?
it's economic modelling. So it's basically you sort of figure out if these projects that they've got on, if they're worthwhile, and
Right.
also because in the oil industry there's lots of taking over of other companies, so it's just to see if they're worth money and and that kind of thing.
You seem pretty cutthroat, to be honest.
yeah, real. But then I had, Paddy and I, we got married down here 7-8 years ago, but still lived in Wellington at the time, just really liked it down here. And Paddy's from Invercargill originally, so there's always a plan to try and get us down here at some point. But then I got pregnant and had my first child, Thomas, and I was on maternity leave. And while I was there, I got made redundant from New Zealand Oil and Gas. So,
wow.
Yeah, so that's when we sort of decided might as well take the big leap and head down. And Paddy got a job down here, and
Great. Fantastic. So and Paddy got a job at QLDC at that time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So the main reason to come down was just was because Paddy had familiarity, well, he was close to his home, I suppose, in Invercargill.
Yeah, and it's just thought it would be a nice place to bring up children as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah. Oh, that's you've done quite a bit already, and funny enough, none of it, as far as I can tell, has anything to do with stargazing.
Yeah, that's the brilliance of it.
So now we need to know how the whole stargazing came into the picture.
Yeah, well, I guess I was always interested just as a little child in the stars, and living in the Wairarapa, it's quite dark sky, and my dad was a really keen tramper, so he used to take us up in the tararuas, and we just see the big expanse of the sky, and so always just had a real interest in that side of it. And then I guess all the legends, the Maori legends, which come from it as well. So that was quite neat to kind of learn that, and that was when I sort of got I've always been interested, but then the job came up at Skyline as a stargazing guide. And at that stage I had Isaac, and he was just a little baby. So it was perfect because it was night work. So Paddy could do the dad thing in the nights, and I can do the mum thing in the day.
Yep.
Yeah, so it just sort of fitted in quite nicely in that respect, yeah.
Nice. So did you have to go and like do any courses, or is this really just like a hobby that's turned into the ability to be a full-time job? Like how does it work?
It was a lot of learning on the job, so just from the stargazing guides that were up there, and then just lots of research and listening to any sort of podcasts or webinars and things like that about the sky and space, and there's a lot out there. And so it was, I guess, a kind of like a hobby that's turned into someone pays me to do. So
so what are your favourite podcasts to listen to then?
For NASA, pretty much.
Oh, NASA, right? Yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
They put out a bunch
that makes sense.
Yeah, they put out a bunch of podcasts, and they're quite interesting. Some of them are a bit full on, but but yeah, they're good. Sky and Telescope, they have a monthly star guide, so it tells you what's happening in the night ahead. But the problem is that it's all Northern Hemisphere based.
Right, of course. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but the constellations we see down here in the Southern Hemisphere are quite different, or
they're exactly the same, but they're upside down.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Pot, which is Orion, or Tautoru for us, is upside down to if you were like in North America or in Europe looking at them.
Right. Right. Ah. Okay. So they're the same.
Yeah. Although in saying that, we do have an area of space that we can only see in the Southern Hemisphere, and they have an area of space that they can only see in the Northern Hemisphere.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah. Cool.
Which is like, the big. Have you heard of the Big Dipper and?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you can only see that up in the Northern Hemisphere.
Ah.
Whereas we have the Southern Cross, Mātonga, that we can only see down here in the Southern Hemisphere.
So they can't see the Southern.
No.
So things are falling into place now, because the plough, the Big Dipper, is the one that I would have always been able to just look up and see, and just been like, recognise. So obviously, and I've never been able to see it, and that's why it's down here. So there you go.
Yeah. And the cool thing about
finally
down here in the Southern Hemisphere is it's estimated that the global population at any one time is only between 10 and 12%. So not many people have seen or ever will see what we see down here, especially down here in Tahuna and Queenstown, because it's so dark and we're so far south, and we've just got these beautiful skies.
Wow. So I guess things like the Aurora Australis is an example where we only would see that down here. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, in places like Chile, and they get to see it in Argentina, but we see it down here. Yeah.
Wow.
And even like you can't necessarily, like every now and then you'll have a big one that they could maybe see in Auckland, but most of the time it's sort of south of here that you see them quite well. Yeah.
It's funny how I've never asked that question before. Like, it's taken until you explaining it to know that it's the same stuff upside down. Yeah. And then there's little portions of the sky that we only see here and portions of the sky that they only see there. It's such a simple thing to understand, and yet I've never known that until this minute.
Yeah, well, you don't know what you don't know, really.
That's true. That's true. But, I mean, I've always been a fan of space and the stars. Little boys were all about Star Wars, and not necessarily Star Trek, but definitely Star Wars.
Yeah.
I love a Star Trek. Love a Star Trek.
Do you? Oh, yeah. Nice. Yeah, I used to. I like the original, but there's just too many versions of the later ones that, anyway, so yes, as a little boy, I loved the stars. I loved all the planets and the potential for things that are out there. So here's a random question for you. So, do you personally believe that there's life? Life out there somewhere? Asked.
And it changes. So some days I'm like, there must be, so big, there must be something. And then other days I'm like, well, it took a lot of kind of random effects for us to happen.
For us,
yeah. But now at the moment, I think there probably is. Like, we're probably, it's just so big, and it would be amazing to think that we're the only life forms. But I don't think we'll ever. Well, I don't think we'll be visited in maybe in our lifetime, or by anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd have to be so far advanced in their technology. And then for them to be so far advanced in their technology, I mean, they might have seen us and then be like, why would they come to Earth, with all the wars and we're destroying the planet and things like that.
I know.
But then if they do come, then because they're so far advanced, then maybe they've part more of a collaborative kind of place that won't be wars and fights. So maybe we'll be okay. Yeah.
So it is all about co-design at the moment. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So I think that there probably is, and I think we'll probably find life, not little green men life, but like microbes and bacteria, probably in the next maybe 10 to 20 years. There's a lot of rockets that are heading out to space to have a look at the moons of, especially Jupiter, Pariato, to see if there's anything in there. Yeah.
So do you think there's a chance there could be life even just within our solar system?
Yeah, like microbes, bacteria, or at least like that there was something there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Like, have you spent any time analysing or watching some of the feeds that have come back from the lander on Mars?
Oh yeah, they're cool. They're so cool. And there was maybe 7 years ago, there was a asteroid which came off Mars and was in Antarctica, and they brought that back.
Really?
Yeah,
they came from Mars.
Yeah, we do get hit by a few
wow.
Mars asteroids. Well, shooting stars, I guess, more like meteorites. And they found on that rock, they analysed it was a decent size, and they found kind of traces of, I guess, materials that could have been produced by microbes. So not necessarily microbes themselves, but just the decaying bits that were left.
Right, the leftover.
Yeah, so they're pretty, not certain, but they're pretty sure there was some kind of microbes or bacteria up there. Yeah. I mean, shooting stars, like meteorites, we get hit by 4 billion every day. Like 4 billion, that's a massive amount.
4 billion?
Amount I'd love to see in my bank account, but they're so small.
I'm like so fascinated but confused at the same time. So how does a meteor come from Mars?
So when this I'll try and condense it. When the solar system was formed, there was like a whole bunch of rocks and stuff left over that didn't form planets, or that during the time, because it was such a rough time, smashed into like planets and bits came off. So we've got an asteroid belt, and like there's lots of kind of rocks that are just cruising around from when it was back in the day. So these are the things that are hitting us. Plus, there's probably a whole bunch of space junk from old satellites and stuff that gets burned. And most of it that hits is probably about the size of a grain of sand, so you don't necessarily see it. And the problem is that here, if it comes down on, say, New Zealand, for example, the rocks just look like rocks.
So
really? They're hard to see. Yeah, there was.
You mean they're not glowing green?
No.
Darn it!
And they look really boring. They look just like, because mainly iron is what's coming down.
Okay.
And they think a big one hit the West Coast like decades ago, and they've had a few university teams go out and try and find it just using metal detectors, basically. But they're hard to find. But in places like Morocco and the deserts and Antarctica, because it's white and because it's sand, it's way easier to find.
Easier. Yeah.
And so we can get them. And I've got a couple of space rocks, one from Morocco and one from Australia. In the desert there. Yeah. So you can buy them.
Oh wow.
That's
pretty trippy.
Yeah. And especially down here, because the sky's so dark, if you can get to a place where there's no light, then you're looking at seeing anywhere between sort of 6 and 12 in an hour. So, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They're so, and like back in the day, our ancestors, they would see them, and they don't really tell you any environmental factors as such, but they would use it to scare the children. So you'd see lots on Whiro and the new moon, because it was so dark, and that was like the time that you were meant to stay at home and not go out. And so they would say that they were atua that had been naughty or up to mischief, and Rangino had slapped them, which is that flash, and they'd come down to earth to cause a bit of mischief.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's like all of those fairy stories about the witches into the woods and things. It's all to scare the children into behaving. I like it.
No, they're still doing it, still telling those stories to scare us.
Yeah. So go outside, whānau, and look up. That's one thing that you can see with your naked eye. That's pretty neat.
So I'm going to go all conspiracy theory here just for a second. I'll dig us back out of the hole. But there's a lot of we didn't really go to the moon sort of sentiment out there. Now, I would assume that you've just from the stuff that you've analysed through NASA, that I'm not saying that you know for sure, but obviously you'd have a fair idea that in order for that conspiracy to be true, there'd be a whole bunch of, I don't know, let's just say 100,000 people would all have to be in on it all at the same time and all be trusted not to share the inside story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've drunk in the Kool-Aid to believe that we've been to the moon.
Have you?
Yeah,
I did too. Yeah.
I mean, they say, like, one of the big ones was that when they showed pictures, it showed the flag waving in the wind, and there's no atmosphere. Well, there's very little atmosphere on the moon, so how could there be wind? But because there's not much atmosphere and gravity, if you shake the pole, it just shakes and shakes and shakes and shakes forever because there's not gravity there to stop it.
Stop it,
So
right.
that explains that thing. And so there's a whole bunch of bits and pieces that can be explained, and they all have been explained. But, you know.
Oh, we all had. I mean, you know, as young guys in particular, if you watch enough science fiction, you just sort of not only fall into the conspiracy theory trap, but I spent so long staring at those Mars pictures, looking for a little alien in the corners. You know, there's one behind a rock.
Yeah.
It's just like,
it is quite fun. It's like a puzzle, really. You're like,
it is.
What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, but they are looking to send the first female and the first male back. Well, the male and the first female back to the moon. And it changes. It depends who's in government over in America as to how much budget they get. But and it's been pushed back. So maybe 2024 is what they're saying now.
Oh, really?
Yep. So, and it's good because here in Aotearoa Rocket Lab, they are working with NASA, and 2 days ago they sent a rocket up to put a satellite around the moon because they got a test out for communication. So. That's what's really cool is it's such an exciting space, and like usually little old Aotearoa, like we don't really have much to do with big old NASA, but now, you know, we can do stuff here.
Yeah, they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
So what was the decision to use New Zealand? I hear that it's because it's got clearer skies or something. There's something about New Zealand that makes it easier to do a bit of space searching, I suppose.
Yep, it's because we're so far south that there's just water. So big problem in America, and why they do a few rocket launches not necessarily on American soil, is because they have to worry about planes and stuff flying overhead. Oh, right. Just for their initial launch. And obviously, because we're in New Zealand and there's not much around, there's not that many planes flying this far down, so we don't have to worry about that. Also, there's lots of satellites in space, I think. Like maybe over 5,000 at the moment, even probably more than that. And these satellites kind of get in the way because they go mainly around the equator and not that much around the poles. So because we're close to the pole, we don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
So it's more like a traffic issue.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's dark, and the darkness doesn't really matter too much, but yeah, it's just kind of far south and there's not much around here.
Yeah, Yeah, okay. That kind of totally makes logical sense as to why you would do that. So now I'm going to kind of shift tact a little bit and talk a little bit about, I guess, the Maori relationship with the stars. And you've spent a little bit of time researching and doing a little bit of work on, you know, the stuff that Rangi Mātāmua has been up to.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that and kind of where the journey started, I suppose. Yeah,
I was trying to think back where I got into it initially, and it was kind of when I started, so like 5 years ago, really. But that's kind of my, I guess that's what I'm really interested in, is the ranginui from a te ao Māori perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess my main people that I've got the knowledge of for now is Rangi Mātāmua, Sam Rerekura. He's the Puanga guy. He's amazing. And Ricky Solomon does the kind of the maramataka. So that's quite interesting from that sort of side of it. And then my interest is rangi nui, but also in the environmental factors, especially down here in Tahuna or Aotearoa in general, really.
Right.
So it's funny because Matariki, it's just so great that we've finally got it acknowledged and everyone's there for it. And it sort of feels like it's been a long time coming. But now that we've got there, it's really beautiful. It's nice to finally have this Indigenous holiday, and I'm pretty sure it's the only Indigenous holiday in the whole of the world.
Really?
Yeah, which is sad. And I could be wrong, but that's what I've heard.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. Sad but good. Like go us.
I mean, it's that kind of stuff that makes me proud to be Māori, but at the same time, it makes you sad for how Indigenous cultures have been treated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Or less about treated and more about not being taken seriously, I suppose. There's so much of Western life is about calling Indigenous cultures sort of savage and prehistoric and not relevant, and yet to us, certainly for Māori, our culture remains relevant.
Absolutely.
Even for all of the stuff that goes back. So, some of the information that we've passed down over the centuries, it's still relevant to us.
Yeah, and I mean, that's when I do talks on it, that's what I want to get across as Māori a scientist. Like, it's not some kind of hippy-dippy... Like, there is that beautiful kōrero, like the mythology and all that sort of thing, but it's grounded in science.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that was kind of, I guess that's what opened my eyes to it, and that's what I really got into it for. So, like the fact that Maui's fishhook, or... so it's a scorpion tail, or if anyone's seen Moana, it's Maui's fishhook, Te Mata Maui, that is at 41 degrees latitude, and the other part of New Zealand, which is at 41 degrees latitude, is the mouth of the fish of Wellington. So that's science, right? Like, how did they know? They didn't have that kind of technology to be able to tell, and that was their main way of being able to navigate over there, but they just got it absolutely precise, which is amazing. And then also the fact that Te Waka o Tamariri, which is the really tapu constellation in our sky, made up of Matariki and Tautoru. So the story is that this waka had Tamariri, or it was Te Waka o Rangi Tamariri, was the great chief, and he would go across our skies for about 11 months of the year and fish up the souls of our loved ones, and he'd put it in that middle star of the pot handle. And that middle star is Te Haurua, which is a nebula. And so we believe that the souls of our loved ones, they get prepared to be stars. So all our loved ones become stars in the night sky, and that nebula is a star-making area. Like, in science, it's actually a place where stars are formed.
Wow.
And they wouldn't have known that. They didn't have telescopes or anything like that. But, yeah, there's science kind of behind. Yeah.
Oh, my God, that's so trippy. That is wicked.
Yeah.
Wicked. We had... I went to a dinner in Glenorchy with Dr. Boyle, I think his name was.
Yes, the astrophysicist.
And I mean, he mentioned that roughly an estimate of all the stars in the sky, or all the stars in the universe, are within sort of realms of the total number of people who have died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in history.
Yeah.
So, and that just brings that back to me as well about whetūrangitia, the concept of whetūrangitia. You just mentioned, where our loved ones, after the past, they turn into stars.
Yeah.
It's, so he was bringing up the fact that it's such a coincidence that the exact number of people who have died amounts to roughly the exact number of stars there are in the universe, which... I would have thought it'd be far more than that, but anyway, that's maybe I got his message not quite right, but that was sort of what he was telling us. Yeah.
You
were there, right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. It was a really beautiful way to weave in the kōrero that you gave, Corey, with his sort of message about the dark skies and what they were talking about. So it was nice. It's a nice kōrero from him to
Yeah.
move into Matariki.
Yeah, I think he might have been talking about a particular galaxy, maybe. I'm not sure.
Probably ours.
Yeah, it was a cool kōrero anyway, you know. And so much of this, like you said, I think even a lot of Māori don't understand that that our mātauranga, our Māori knowledge, a lot of it is steeped in science as well, or it has a connection to science.
Yeah.
Not saying that we were scientists in a modern sense back in the day, but I don't call it coincidental that a lot of our information happens to align with scientific measure as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, there seems to be such obvious scientific elements to our history that's been passed down to us.
Yeah.
I suppose science is all about that. It's all about observable things.
Yeah.
You observe things, you test it, and you know that, and then you find a way to explain it through your observing of things.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You'll, just like in Western science, we pop it into a certain degree with a certain terminology. All cultures have done that, haven't they? They've just put it into a way of explaining things. A way of explaining things that people have observed over centuries.
Yeah, the fact that they were so advanced though, like they knew the degrees, the 41 degrees. They knew that that was a star forming area. Like that's kind of spooky, amazing. And like it's really cool outside at the moment because we're just past Māori New Year. We've got Takarua, the winter, or Hine Takarua or Takarua, the winter stars coming up. And as he's going up, or she, depending on what area you're from, we've got Rihua, which is in Maui's fishhook, going down. And you see it's almost this poetic way of the... that Tamariri's waka, it flows on through our Milky Way from that constellation to the Scorpion constellation, or Maui's fishhook, and then just before Maui's fishhook is where it kind of would dive down, and that's the centre of our universe. That's what we know now, which is the Sagittarius constellation, and we orbit around what's known as a supermassive black hole, Sagittarius A. But that waka's path is directly to that. So, like, how did they know that was the centre of our Milky Way galaxy? No,
I didn't know any of this. Really?
Absolutely, amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that Te Mata o Maui. So the kōrero about how Maui slowed down the sun.
Yeah.
So he used his fishhook to grab the sun and put the ropes and stuff on it. So the Scorpion constellation, it's in the sun, so it sets with the sun, or the sun's in its constellation kind of around the end of November time. And our longest day, so when that fishhook is really holding onto the sun, is around that time as well. So that's why we have the long days, because we've got Maui's fishhook holding it down. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, this is it's... Okay, this is a bit mind-blowing. See, I didn't know any of this stuff. I knew pieces of the stuff you're talking about, but not the... So the one... Can you just explain the piece that really... It blew my mind quite a while ago, and I've been trying to process it ever since.
Yeah.
The position of Te Mata Maui, I guess, which is the fishhook of Maui.
Yeah.
Is that a constellation, is it?
Yes, so it's a Scorpion constellation is what it's, I guess, what you would know about it in European terms.
Wow.
But Te Mata o Maui is, what we call it. And at the moment, so whānau, go outside tomorrow morning and look up at the sky, and then you'll see Te Mata o Maui will be setting, and he kind of looks like a question mark. He looks kind of like a fishhook, but like a question mark. And at this time, so some iwi believe that Ranginui's been held up by a bunch of poles, and his chest has been, like, kind of the strongest part of him has been held up by Te Mata o Maui, which is why it's got that hook, why it's bent, because it's so heavy, he's carrying him so much. Right. So Ranginui's head is just off from there. So you just have to kind of imagine him lying in a straight line there. But it's a really great time to go stargazing from a Te Ao Māori perspective at the moment. Actually, it always is. But
always, yeah. There's always something to see.
There's always something, yeah. But it's really cool at the moment because you've got Takarua coming up, and we've just entered into that month Takaroa on your
Yep.
Te Roa Takaroa. And so you can see him coming up. And so some iwi, so most like the iwi that follow Puanga or Puaka from down here, they see Takaroa as the youngest, as the Pōtiki as the youngest son, and Matariki's the middle child. And so that's their family, and the parents are Rihua.
Rihua.
So Rihua is really easy to spot at the moment. He's also known as Antares, and he's in the Scorpion constellation. He's a really red star kind of in that Te Mata Maui, and he's a really tapu star. He also tells us when summer's going to come.
Yeah.
So that's the dad, and then is it Whaitiri is the mum.
Ah, Whaitiri.
Okay. Yeah. So the lightning atua. And that's the other cool story is that so Whaitiri, she was said to there's a kōrero about her, but she kind of left the earth and went back up, and she's said to be hanging out up on the Pot constellation on Tautoru.
Okay.
And like another thing that blows my mind is she's said to live in a cave there, and the closest black hole to us here on Earth is in that area that she's meant to be. So a black hole is basically when, so poor old stars, they have this constant battle within themselves where they have this atomic energy pushing out and this gravity pushing in, and eventually that energy runs out, and when it runs out, gravity wins. There's a big explosion called a supernova, and then that gravity just carries on for like infinity, which is why we call it a black hole, because light, the fastest thing we know of, can't escape it. So it's this kind of darkness, this blackness, and that's where she kind of hangs out. But they wouldn't have known that.
No.
Like, there was no way that you could have. But still, they placed her exactly where a dark cave is. Yeah.
So thanks for explaining the Te Mata Maui and its connection to Te Ika Maui here.
Yeah.
That was a bit trippy to hear. I'd never heard that before. So that was a great little kōrero. But then, so the other thing that's always been known as a mystery, apparently it's a mystery, but then not. I don't believe it's a mystery. Maybe the only mystery is that it's not commonly shared how they did it. So there was so obviously waka migration to and from New Zealand back again.
Yeah.
And you know, New Zealand is such a small little speck in the middle of the ocean there that there's a sort of there's this implication that Māori just happened to bump into it, like we accidentally come across New Zealand, and yet you would not do migrations backwards and forwards if it was an accidental thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It's so obvious to me that they knew exactly where this land was and they plotted a course for it.
Yeah.
So in your mind or through your knowledge or through your experience, was that all star-based? Is that how they would have done it?
Not just so. With star knowledge, kokorangi or tataorangi, it's not just ranginui, it's like all the environmental factors as well. So it's papa tuanuku as well. But what my understanding is that they saw the tohora, the whale migration.
Ah, right.
And not necessarily, or they were interested to see where they went, but they were kind of like, well, they're going somewhere, and we know that where the whales migrate, they're following fish. So if we follow the whales, we're going to be able to eat on our way. And they were adventurers, they were discoverers. And I think we kind of forget that, you know, that we think the Europeans were the ones that sort of went around trying to discover new lands. But you know, we did as well. Yeah,
of course.
And so they weren't silly. Like, they knew they needed to eat and do all their bits and pieces along the way. So they used the environmental factors. They waited for the star to be able to tell them when the whale migration will start, when it will end, and also the birds and things like that. So they knew they were going somewhere. So especially the birds, because they have to. Of course,
they've got to land at some point.
Yeah, and so their way to discover new lands was to follow that. And that's why the Scorpion constellation and Matariki as well were quite important navigational things to use. And that's why Matariki for us down here is quite low in our horizon, whereas from Hawaii it's a bit higher up because they're closer to the equator. And then once they got even further south, they got to the Southern Cross, and they could use that as well as part of their migration, as part of their way to see. So it's just because as you're moving further south, these stars, they don't necessarily disappear, but they go a bit higher in the sky, the ones that are further south, whereas Matariki would have gone a bit lower. Yeah.
Wow. Man, this is wicked, wicked. I could have done with this conversation before Matariki, because I've been helping people. I've been helping people understand what Matariki is, and I know all the basic stuff through Rangi Matamua. A lot of his lectures. What all the stars mean, etc. But this is the peripheral information that. It's not that I haven't bothered to learn. It's just. There's so much that you could learn. There's so much about the stars.
It's hard to get the information as well. Yeah,
I bet. So I know exactly who to come who to come knocking for what I need to know.
Just imagine how prepared you'll be for next year.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I share currently with people who aren't familiar with what Matariki is, I have to tell myself, just try and sanitize some of what you're saying, because there's just so much information.
Absolutely.
That you've got to give it to them in digestible pieces, not all at once, where it becomes overwhelming. However, I'm the opposite. I want to be overwhelmed, so you just keep throwing more and more and more. This is fantastic. One of the best things about having it as a podcast is I can go back and rewatch and listen to some of the stuff that you said.
Yeah, I hope it's all right.
Yeah. So, my God, we could just keep going on and on. So we're sort of not far away from closing, but I'd like to sort of ask a question that I get asked a lot because of Matariki, and it's I'll be interested to know your answer. I think it'll be probably very similar to mine, but you've got a little bit more mātauranga and scientific mātauranga, so your answers might be a little bit different. So what does Matariki mean to you?
So Matariki, to me, I am trying to follow what we do down here, so Ngāi Tahu. So I'm all about Puanga this year. Well, so in some of the kōrero I've been trying to just sort of subtly drop them in. So, but Matariki, it's for us down here, Matariki rises 45 minutes after what it would in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. So and this year's a tough year because she's so close to the sun. So it's really hard to get an environmental reading for her.
Right.
Whereas Puanga, fine, high enough, good to go. You can set your clocks by. But this year we'll add another month in, which means next year it'll be much easier because he'll be higher.
Right.
She'll be higher, so we'll be able to make a reading. So, but from an overall sense, I just think it's a really good way of joining people together. It's cool to see the individual stars and to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to read them and see if what they say comes true. It's kind of like having a long range weather forecast.
Right.
But I really like the fact that it's joining everyone together, and you don't need to be Maori. Like your ancestors, whether you're European, whether you're North American, they all would have looked up and seen Matariki.
Yep.
Known as the Seven Sisters. Like in Australia, they use their. There's just so many kōrero, and so way back down in your line, someone probably in your family did look up. So it doesn't we're all kind of connected by this one kind of beautiful constellation. But yes, so Puanga is kind of my just trying to teach a little bit more about
Puanga.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So on the subject of Puanga then, or Puaka, so I know the standard kōrero or story about looking to each of the individual stars of Matariki to, forecast what may be coming in the year ahead in terms of the types of food to harvest, when to harvest, etc. Does does Puaka have the same indicators, or how does it work with Puaka to make those determinations?
So Puaka's does. It's like your long range forecast, so you can still see if he's twinkly, even if he's not there at all because of clouds and that sort of thing. But he's only one star, so he doesn't give you the individuals like Matariki does.
Of course.
So he's what you'd use just to set your watch to, basically.
Okay.
But you can do a reading being like, okay, it looks like it'll be a pretty good year.
Yeah, right.
So this morning, because I knew that I was coming here, I ran up Tobin's track, the maunga behind us, and I tried to do a reading of Takaroa because that's the star that we're using now to do this month. So kind of the same way that I would do a reading of Takaroa, I'd try and do it for Puanga. And so Takaroa today was shining quite bright, and it wasn't sparkling, even though I could see there was a little bit of clouds. And so my forecast for today was that it would be sunny and not freezing cold because there wasn't any sort of sparkliness to it. But the science behind it is, so when Matariki or when Puanga or Puaka or like Takaroa, the month's star, when they're sparkling or kind of going a certain way, that means that there's something in the atmosphere. So there could be ice crystals, rain or water up there, and some, like back in the day, our ancestors, they would even be able to tell which way the wind was going because they'd have this amazing eyesight to be able to see that one side of the star was kind of a bit wavery and then not the other, but I definitely can't do that. And so that's kind of the science behind it. We're just looking at the upper atmosphere.
Wow.
And that's why the month stars, so every month there'll be a new star which will pop up in the right phase of the moon, and that's when you'll be able to set your watch to say that the month's starting, and that's when you can sort of take your month forecast of what it's going to be. And obviously depending on like if you're in summer or winter, you can sort of tell what the stars kind of what's to prepare for ahead.
Yeah.
So today was really interesting because it told me it was going to be a nice day, and it told me that it's probably going to be warmish, not freezing, not negatives.
Wow.
But then the sky was red afterwards, and the thing with that is that would normally tell you that it's going to rain. But the thing is, so one of the stories that they tell you about the Rangi and Papa's separation, which you don't tell children usually, is that they had to cut off his arms to get up.
Yeah.
And so when he bleeds, that's when the sky turns pink. But what's happened recently is Ruamoku's got involved, and there was a Tongan eruption back in January, and so that volcanic particles have gone up to our upper atmosphere. And so that's giving us, this really beautiful
colouring.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But it's still an indicator to us.
Yep.
So if you're an astrophotographer, it's really cool because you get these beautiful pinks and purples at the moment, which you don't normally get. But it also tells me that maybe Ranginui will start crying for Papa Tuanuku soon. So we might get some mist coming up, or there might have been this morning, but I didn't see. So maybe in the next couple of days we might see some mist. So that's sort of what you're looking at, like from the science te ao Māori perspective, that's what you're kind of looking at for that kind of thing. So I guess the Matariki's a little bit more, not whimsical, but a bit more forward-looking, so that it's not as specific for what the whole year will be. But, it's like a long-range weather forecast. You know that most of the time it's probably right, but it's not always right.
Of course, yeah. No different to, Augie Hour and all the other meteorologists that forecast our weather. They don't always get it right, whānau. So, man, that's fantastic.
Really cool.
I had a question about Puaka again, but I think you pretty much answered all of it, really.
Yeah, I thought that Puaka. Well, I didn't really know, but. Because Puaka is the single star, I was like, oh, maybe it's an all or nothing kind of like either it's the year's going to be good, or it's going to be a bit, off. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and it kind of is. Yeah, and that's the thing, they say that Puaka, Puanga and Matariki, they're just in this constant jealousy kind of because they're siblings.
Yeah.
And they're trying to fight to see who's going to rise with the sun. So Matariki looks really beautiful, but she's small, whereas Puanga's a bit brighter.
Brighter, yeah.
And Puanga's Rigel in Orion, is, if you're looking for it, Matariki's Pleiades.
Yeah.
In the Taurus constellation. And so they're just having this big battle within themselves to see who's going to win the favours of the sun and rise with him.
Okay, so I get different pronunciations of the English words here. So I'd be interested to know, is there a one way to pronounce Pleiades or Pleiades?
Yeah, Pleiades, no. And it's all through astronomy. There's lots of words for stars like Speaker and Spiker, which we see as Wainui, and that's in the Virgo constellation. And so it just sort of depends, really.
Okay.
I mean, there's people that would die hard for it being said the right way, but
Yeah.
you know.
Because I think you called it Rigel.
Yes.
Yeah, because Rigel is the way that
I've
always heard it. You know, so,
and that's not the
so it's okay to use either one, whānau, because as long as we're talking about the same star, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. Oh, God, we've almost come up to time. I just want to keep talking about the stars. And I just feel like we need to get you back on at some stage to just talk about, you know, again, the our ancestral connections to the stars in maybe other areas or other times. So, you know, obviously we're focusing quite heavily on the Matariki time period right now, but I would assume we use the stars in other periods of time for other purposes as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Or much like you do in a modern sense, you get different constellations appearing at different times of the year. So I would assume some of those, the viewing of some of those constellations or clusters by our tipuna may have indicated other stuff.
Yeah, and it's really even more important because they used it to live by. So for whānau, I'll give you a go out to the night sky and look up for this time of the year. So it's really cool at the moment because we've got the planets all up in the night sky. So and they're in the order of how they are from the sun at the moment, which hasn't happened for like 20 plus years.
Yep.
So you've got Mercury, Venus, Kopu, Pariaro, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they're all in a line at the moment in the early dawn. So if you go out, like down here, it's like 7 o'clock, but just before the sun rises. And it's really easy to be able to find Matariki because we've got Kopu pointing to her at the moment. So that's what you want to look for. And Kopu is really bright. It's the brightest object in our night sky apart from the moon. So keep an eye on that. And then we've got Te Waka or Rangi, which is the pot kind of is the end of it, Tautoru, and that's rising at the moment as well. And that one, as it's rising at the moment, it's kind of rising and it's meant to look like the bird snare that they used to use. So we know that at this time of year, when that's rising at that kind of angle, that it's the time that we go out and we used to get our kereru, because the kereru would be fat on the redo berries.
Yeah.
But you'd never want to go out any other time. He needs to rise at this kind of takarua phase because otherwise apparently they tasted gross.
Interesting.
Because they'd be eating other things.
Interesting. Yeah.
But in a more modern sense, this is the time of year you see them rising, that if you want to have birds come into your backyard, this is when you put your sugar water out because that's what they're feasting on. They're wanting some high sugar, whereas if you did that during the summer, there's no use. And then you'll see takarua as a bright star, which is just probably about a fist, and if you have your fist out at arm's length, probably a fist away from the pot, and easy to spot. He's the brightest star in our night sky. His name's Sirius. He's seriously bright.
Love it. Yeah. I got that. that.
So that's takarua. So that's the one that we're looking for, and he's our winter star, or she, depending where you're from. And then if you look all the way on the other side of the sky to the southwest, then you've got Te Mata Maui coming down, and that looks like a little triangle. Or not a little triangle, like a little question mark. Yeah.
My God, fantastic. One of my favourite people to listen to from Mātauranga Māori perspective is Rangi Mātamua.
Absolutely.
I had the pleasure of going to a kōrereo where he was one of the kaiako for a
cool.
session, and it was just fantastic. All of the knowledge about, and he spoke less about the stars because he talked more about those environmental factors that you talked about. So the bird migrations, the fish migrations, and telling time based on what was happening in the environment.
Yeah,
it's just fantastic. So fascinating. And then from that came all of the whakatauki or proverbs and all of the kupu whakaniko, which are or kupu whakarite, which are metaphors. You know how we use metaphoric language to describe things. So and now through all of that, it's really sparked my interest in the whole stargazing aspect of it. So I spent a little bit of time analysing Matariki, not much on Puaka, but I'm just so fortunate that I got to meet you and listen to your kōrero because it's come at the perfect time for me personally as well as for New Zealand. So I thank you so much for coming along.
No problem.
And I hope we can get you back at some other time when there's something else, I don't know, of significance that's happening in the stars or the environment. But what I might do now is I might throw to Alice for the last stage, which is to ask our quick fire questions.
Yeah, we've got the quick fire questions here. So, first of all, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Probably to stick with Māori and do it at a university level when I could, when there'd actually be someone physically to teach me.
Good tip.
And I think I didn't really touch on it, but being a Maori astronomer, it's like a puzzle when you're trying to fit together all the bits and pieces, and because a lot of it's hidden or a lot of it's verbal, you miss out on so much without having the language. So just being able to learn the language a little bit more means that it means so much more. It's a bit more depth in the knowledge. It's not just words. It's not just this star means this thing. It's all the story behind it. Yeah.
Awesome. And do you have a mantra or a whakatauki that you live by?
I think knowledge is actually doing it. So for me at the moment, I can learn all these things, but I have to go outside, look at them, test myself with doing a reading to see if what the environmental factors are actually going to happen with what I think, and I'm actually looking at the right star.
You actually have to do the mahi.
Yeah.
And our final quickfire question is, what was your best stage?
This is tricky. I think probably now, it's a bit of a cop-out, but I'm doing something that I love. I've got my boys. They're a pain in the asses most of the time, but well, maybe 20% of the time, but 80% they're lots of fun, and it sort of inspires me to really kind of learn a bit more so I can pass my heritage, like my mum did for me, onto them. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's the end of this episode. But again, it'd be great if we could get you back on again. I know Taika would be a bit bummed out that he missed having this chat because he was really looking forward to it. Anyway, nei aku mihi ki a koe, ko koe te whakawhiti o te rā. Just a big mihi to you. Thank you so much for coming along and sharing your knowledge with us, your mātauranga, and we really hope that the whānau out there watching really enjoyed this as much as we did. So anyway, if you have any questions of Gemma, feel free to put a question in the comments down below. Give us a like as well, and please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. Mā te wā.